y'all, this is Kasakma Keparu for Project Illuminated, and today I want to talk to you about the secret agenda of white supremacy. Now, I want to really reveal what's going on here because I think there's a lack of understanding of the actual agenda, the plan that's being enacted now. Because we're talking a lot about a revolution that's coming and that things need to change, but we don't see that happening. So I want to reveal to you what's really going on behind the scenes so that we have a better understanding of why we have not, as a collective force, stood up to fight for our rights, aside from sit-in protests and Black Lives Matter type of thing. So let me explain in detail what's happening. Since the enactment of civil rights laws from 1964, we have not seen this revolution, which is talked about so much, in terms of the revolution will not be televised. And there's actually a brilliant film called The Spook Who Sat by the Door, which kind of lays out the scenario of what would happen if there was a real revolution in minority communities, specifically the African-American community. But that scenario has not played itself out. I was watching a video by Dr. Umar Johnson, who I think is a really smart guy, but I can't really align myself with his beliefs because I think it's going in the wrong direction. But he talks about all of these great programs, which we've kind of heard before from Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, Dr. Martin Luther King, where it talks about economic empowerment, political empowerment, social empowerment. But one thing that we cannot forget is that you will not be able to enact those programs to benefit African Americans unless you deal with the psychology of slavery, which still affects us. Every man, woman, and child of African American descent in this country is still affected from a psychological perspective, still affected by slavery. And it manifests in various forms. We sometimes will look at certain people and call them sellouts. Other people will look at them and we'll call them too black, too militant, too dark, too light-skinned. We're caught up in all of these things, which demonstrate that we are not in harmony with the universe, that we're out of balance. And that is because you cannot expect a race of people like ourselves to go through something as traumatic as slavery and not come out of it unscathed. So we have to first, before we start talking about putting in place these wonderful programs, these infrastructures, we have to first talk about how do we deal with healing ourselves as a people, because if we don't address that first, then nothing else is going to come to fruition. There's nothing that we can do that can bring about a change, because we inherently have a self-destruct button. And I've always said that because, as you see with our organizations, when we come together collectively, from the Nation of Islam, from Marcus Garvey's movement to Martin Luther King, there has always been this tendency to have agents within our organizations who ruin it. Even example of the Black Panthers, So we have to be very mindful of the fact that we have an issue in working together cohesively, because there is that self-destruct button, because that we are children of who have gone through something that was horrific, and we need healing. Putting that aside, let's talk about the revolution and why we have not stood up to put in place this revolution to bring about this change for every person. For one thing, we have to understand that what we're facing in terms of racism is a global phenomenon. It is not something that is uniquely inherent to North America. It is something that is affecting every country or nation of color on the planet. It is a constructed concept that has been put in place to cause infighting, factions within factions within factions is what I like to call it. Because no matter where you go on the planet, you'll see that disproportionately nations of color are the ones that are most in poverty or impoverished, and that are struggling with the basic necessities of being able to feed ourselves and for health. You know that African nations are now really being hit so bad by AIDS and other diseases. And this is because this is a plan that's been put in place to keep the populations oppressed, under control, and on the verge of extermination, similar to that of the Native Americans. So let's keep that in mind. But let's examine specifically within the United States why there has not been this long-awaited revolution. And some say it's because we are dependent upon our next leader and so on and so forth. But that is not necessarily the truth, because you don't need an individual to bring about a revolution. The basic foundation of African tradition has always been the principle of Ma'at. That means the people rising up to govern themselves, to be self-determined. It is the people in the communal and cooperative setting that has always been the one to dictate the direction dictate the direction of the family, the nation, of where it will go in African society. In Western society, we have seen there be a more predominant focus on the individual above the collective group interest. So let's keep that in mind. Now, one of the things that the Illuminati has put in place brilliantly, as I indicated before, with the oppression of the African nations, to keep all nations of color oppressed, was to work through social engineering. So what you'll see is a changing of the gender dynamics. They have effectively castrated the black male in African American communities, who is the patriarchy, the one who should be leading the revolution. And to do this, they have empowered black women to the point of where they feel more in charge, where there's now a matriarchy, so that black women can take the lead and don't want to be subjugated under black men, and create a dynamic where there is a gender war within the black community. So once you have effectively switched roles to where you now have African American males who are more passive, unwilling to take a leadership role, unwilling to stand up and be the leaders and captains of industry within our communities. Now, understanding that there's racism that is preventing them from going but so far. But once you have put in place a structure to where you have effectively remove the power structure, remove the support and the power from African American males, and empower the females, you've switched that dynamic. So therefore, the revolution that is supposed to take place cannot take place, because now the ones who are chiefly responsible for enacting that revolution cannot do so. Once more, what you have done is you've created that infighting within the genders, so that they're now fighting amongst themselves and not able to work together collectively to bring about the revolution. The other aspect of it is the fear dynamic. You have now African American males who are afraid now to stand up and take the helm, because there has been that immediate subjugation under white supremacy, where a lot of African American males have been terrorized by police brutality and by the government, which has had a heavy hand on incarcerating African American males and putting them in a system to where they can't get out of that system. So that we see that before, one of the things the Illuminati is really brilliant at doing is that they're brilliant at winning the war without ever so much lifting up a weapon. It is the most brilliant strategy to set things in place to where before the battle has begun, you have already won. And that is the sign of a master chess player. And again, the way they were able to do this was through social engineering, to where they were effectively able to put in place government policies which removed African American males from the household through welfare reform, so that black women would get paid to keep African American males out of the house, destabilizing the black family, so that you would not have male figureheads raising the next generation of males to be leaders, to be strong men. So when you start to do this, and you understand that you are effectively removing any semblance of power that would enable these people to rise up and to be leaders for the next revolutionary movement. And that's where we find ourselves out today. And this is the very reason why we talk of revolution, but no one does anything. And you'll find that a lot within the African American community. There is just this paralysis of analysis where there's just so much talk from black men about what needs to change. Let's talk about Malcolm X, let's talk about Dr. King. But there is never any type of action or moving in that direction to where we're doing anything about it. Unfortunately, what we're doing is all stuff that is like flashy. It's like, hey, look what's happening here. But the real power and things that can benefit us are right here. So, instead of us creating organizations that can support us in our communities, we're busy creating radio broadcasts, movies and films and stuff that are only serving as distractions, but are not real. They're not real foundations of power, not real foundations of an infrastructure that can serve us for generations. And that is the problem that we're finding ourselves in now, is because we're continually talking about the issue, but we're not building anything. If you look at the Nation of Islam, which has been in existence for a long time, they have not built anything of substance to move forth and say, listen, because of us, there's now this economic structure. Because of us, there's now a strong political structure. There's nothing, none of that, because what you'll find is there's this great lectures and talk by so-and-so Muhammad X, but there's never any building. There's never any creation of anything to where these things can be left for future generations or can be utilized by the community at large. There is nothing. And that is the problem that we're facing. And then we have to eventually start looking at that. The gender dynamics have been reversed. The power structure, which traditionally lies in the patriarchy of the black male, has been removed. The idea of building infrastructures that will enable us to bring about a change within our community has been almost to the point of eliminated, because we are not educated enough to operate any type of business organization. So we don't move forward with enacting or erecting these type of things. And therefore, you have this lack of power within our communities to affect any change whatsoever. And that cannot and will not change unless we adopt a policy of where we start healing our people from a mental and spiritual level. And I know there are some who advocate, we must build the infrastructure first, but I'm like, you can try that. But what you're going to have is infighting. You're going to have nothing more than infighting between genders, infighting between different shades, the lighter skin versus the darker skin, the more wealthy versus the less empowered, financially empowered. So you're just going to have all of that. You're going to have the fighting between the Christians and the Muslims. And that's the way the Illuminati set it up to be. And that's exactly the way they want it. And that's exactly the way we see it being played out now. So keep that in mind. I think Dr. Umar Johnson is brilliant in setting forth his plan about, empowerment within our communities. And so many before him have done the exact same thing. But unless you get to the heart of the matter, in the psychology of a people who have come out of a traumatic experience, unless you deal directly with that first, everything else, the structure of it will just fall apart. So this is Kasakma Keparu for Project Illuminated, and that's all for now.